You know what's funny? The word rest used to make me angry. When people would tell me, you need to slow down, you need more balance, you should rest. Internally, I think, that's cute. You clearly don't understand my life. Because to me, rest felt irresponsible, impossible, and honestly like a waste of time. There was too much to do. Too many people depended on me. Too much responsibility. Too much pressure. And survival mode had convinced me that movement was safety. So slowing down didn't feel peaceful. It felt threatening. I think women understand exactly what I mean. Because when your nervous system has spent years associating productivity with survival, stillness feels unsafe. You sit down to rest and suddenly guilt shows up. Your mind starts racing. You think about everything that needs to be done. You feel behind, restless, uncomfortable. So you grab your phone, open your laptop, start cleaning, do literally anything except actually stop. A lot of women call that discipline, but sometimes it's just good old fear. Because survival mode interprets rest as a threat. And after that breakdown season I talked about in the last episode, God started confronting me with something I honestly did not want to hear. The answer was not work harder. The answer was in 4 little letters that I used to hate. R-E-S-T. Welcome back to Karen with an I, Build Bold. I'm Karen, and this is a podcast for the woman who loves God but is tired of building her life braced. The woman carrying leadership, motherhood, business, responsibility, and pressure, and trying to figure out how to build boldly without living in survival mode. We are learning how to build from identity instead of performance, from truth instead of fear, and from alignment instead of anxious striving. And today we're talking about a 4-letter word I used to hate: rest. This episode is not really about naps, though that sounds great right about now. It's about why slowing down feels emotionally unsafe, and why high-capacity women struggle with limits, why survival mode makes us addicted to productivity, and why rest is actually one of the deepest acts of trust we can practice. Because eventually I had to confront this reality. I had built a successful life externally, while internally believing everything would fall apart if I stopped carrying it. But what God wanted for me was different than that. After the breakdown season from episode 8, I knew something had to change because I couldn't keep living at that pace. At first I thought, okay, I just need better time management or better systems, a better organization system, a better productivity system. But that wasn't the solution. The deeper issue wasn't my calendar. It was the fear underneath it. And I think that's why rest felt so offensive to me, because every time someone suggested it, my internal response was, easy for you to say. You don't understand everything I'm carrying. And I know a lot of women know exactly what that feels like. You know, when your husband, who has no clue what's going on in your day to day, just told you to relax, right? When he goes and turns on the game and falls asleep on the couch, when there's piles of laundry everywhere and there's dinner to be made, homework isn't done, and, you know, the family members are all texting you because everyone wants to know what the kids want for Christmas, and your emails are going off because some fire at work needs to be put out, and everything needs to be delivered by tomorrow, and, you know, we all get it. Survival mode convinces you rest is for people who have less responsibility. But around this season in my life, God started confronting me from multiple directions at the exact same time. And one of the biggest things was reading the book that actually one of my team members introduced me to. But it was the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Homer. Honestly, it's the best book I think I've ever read on hustle culture and rest to date. That book exposed things in me I didn't even realize were there. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Um, but it didn't just expose busyness, hurry, and pressure, but just this constant internal urgency that I was carrying and the inability that I had to slow down emotionally. And at the same time, I was taking a new business course about scaling into the luxury wedding market. Um, and here's what shocked me. I was learning that successful people operating at high levels of sustainability were not living frantic lives, not as frantically like I was. So when they wanted to see their business grow, the first thing they prioritized was themselves, and they protected their time. They not only rested, they prioritized their health. They made time to exercise. They set boundaries around what was important to them, like their family time. And they delegated things and just made sure that their health and and the things that gave them life were set and protected. And then when they worked with intentionality instead of constant chaos. And when I started to learn these things, it completely challenged everything survival mode had been teaching me. But then suddenly, God and my nervous system and my body, as well as things I was learning from leadership and successful business owners, were all pointing toward the exact same truths, that the pace I was living at was unsustainable. And at first, it just all sounded so backwards. Like, how could working less create more fruit? That didn't even make sense to me. But then slowly, God started showing me another way. And one of the biggest shifts happened around summertime, because I used to dread summer schedule changes. When school would let out, I used to feel like chaos was about to erupt. And, the kids would get out of school and backpacks would fly and hit the floor and the routines would just disappear because, the kids would be home all day. And internally, I would just start to panic and just try and figure out, how do I run a business and be a good mom? I constantly felt like I was going to be failing at both roles, failing as a mom and failing as a business owner. But this one particular summer, the summer where God had me, come face to face with my survival mode and call it what it was. It was fear. It was not my identity. I had to say goodbye to this and commit to a new way where I'm living, leading, and building, but then submitting the outcome of whatever this was to God and just learn dependence. I had to first go back to the basics and remember why I built this business in the first place. And the answer became very clear. I built this business to be present with my kids, to have flexibility, to create freedom, to build something that supported my family instead of competing with it. And once I let that truth lead my decisions, everything started changing. Instead of trying to cram work into every available second, I started creating intentional rhythms around what mattered most. And my mornings changed completely. My 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. summer time block became my favorite part of my day. 2 to 3 mornings a week, I'd wake up early. I'd go to work out with some of my friends and have coffee with them. The other mornings, I'd spend studying the Bible, and it would just be me and God. And I'd wake up and sit out on the patio and have a cup of coffee with my Bible. And before the house got loud, God would just start to speak. And then the kids would get up and we'd do breakfast together and we'd maybe do a devotion together. And that version of me just felt healthier and more present. And instead of constantly reacting all day, I started structuring intentional rhythms for all of us. One day would be library trips, one day would be a pool day, one day would be grandma's house or projects at home. And then I would schedule independent activity blocks for the kids. And then while they did that, I would set intentional work hours instead of frantically trying to figure out when I would work in the in-between moments like I did when they were toddlers. And eventually I started noticing something really fascinating, that even though I was technically working less, I didn't feel less productive. I actually felt more focused. I remember thinking like, wow, I can't even really fully explain how I feel like this. But deep down, I think I knew, because my time had like limits now. And because my time had limits, I was finally being intentional instead of constantly reactive, which then made me more productive within those time limits. There's this really interesting study from a professor from Stanford University. His name is John Penkivel. He writes, productivity per hour declined sharply when a person works more than 50 hours a week. After 55 hours, productivity drops so much that putting in any more hours would be pointless. Those who work up to 70 hours a week are only getting the same amount of work done as those who put in 55 hours. So again, even though I was working less, I didn't feel less productive. I actually felt more focused, and I don't even really understand how that's possible. But that entire summer, I was working less and spending more time with my kids and being present physically and emotionally. And I was being more intentional about this time blocking I was learning about, spending more time with the Lord in the mornings, learning how to pray, not just for outcomes, but learning how to pray for wisdom and dependency. I was also spending more time on my health and working out in the mornings. And at this point in my business, I had a team. So I had to trust that my team was capable of handling things without me. I actually remember this one time I was actually at the pool with my kids and my husband, and my husband comes up to me and goes, doesn't your team have a wedding this weekend? And I was like, I don't know. I think so. And he was like, who are you? And what have you done with Karen? That you don't even know that it's happening and you don't even know if it's going well, or like you're not micromanaging right now and you don't it was just very interesting for me to fully let go and not need to like be checking in and whose wedding is it and how's it going, and it was just very unlike me to like fully let go of something like that. Here's the really mind-blowing part. That summer, I probably averaged working 20 hours a week, maybe 4 hours a day. And I intentionally made sure that, there were weekends I was not working weddings and delegating more to my team. And I just want to make sure that you know that I am giving all credit and glory to God for what I'm about to say next. But that year, the business doubled its revenue growth, and we became a multi-six-figure company for the first time that year. Yeah, I did not see that one coming. I worked less, rested more, but the business grew when I did that. I can't explain any of that to you. I have no words. So there's that. Oh, and I also lost 50 pounds that year. Isn't God great? Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And honestly, like, it was this story. Then I'm like, people have to know this. If this story is the only reason I started a podcast, it was this story that I wanted women and business owners to know. that you don't have to kill yourself, you don't have to work harder to see the fruits and the goodness of God and the blessing of God in your business. When it's something that God has called you to, when it's good, and when it's aligned for God to bless it, like I was just blown away by all of that. Like, don't get me wrong, you have to work hard. Hard work pays off. My team and I, we worked hard, but we didn't have to kill ourselves. I wish I could tell you I don't run back to survival mode when pressure hits, but I do. It's my default mode. But I can at least recognize it now and call it out before it runs my decisions. I think one of the reasons high capacity women struggle so deeply with rest is because rest exposes what we actually trust. Because when you stop moving, you can no longer hide behind movement. And that's terrifying because survival mode survives through momentum, constant productivity, constant noise, constant caring, constant urgency, and eventually you start associating usefulness with worth. So if you're not producing, you feel guilty. Some of us are terrified of stillness because stillness forces us to confront what's happening internally. Anxiety and pressure, fear of exhaustion, emotional overload, and survival mode would rather stay busy than become honest. That's why some women can physically stop working, but still never actually rest, because internally their nervous system is still braced. That was me for years, and it's still me to some degree, because it has to be untrained. Even at night, when I finally stop working, my brain is still moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, because survival mode doesn't shut off automatically. It has to be retrained. That's why rest becomes such a spiritual issue for me, because eventually God started revealing my inability to rest was connected to my inability to release control. Deep down, I still believed everything depended on me, and that belief was exhausting for me. At bedtime, I literally have to ask God, hey, I'm done now, and I give this to you. Help me rest. I'm laying this at your feet, even if it's just for tonight. Nothing is that urgent that I can't get some rest tonight. The outcome is yours, Lord, and I'm resting in you. And if I'm still not able to rest, like God, reveal to me, what am I still gripping onto? Reveal that, please, so I can give it to you. So before this season, I mostly viewed Sabbath as, just the seventh day that God rested. And culturally, it's just become the day, we all go to church. Rest was never something I associated with it. Making it about no work was something the Jewish culture did. One of the things God started showing me, though, during the season was that rest was never humanity's idea first. It was God's. That completely changed the way I viewed it. Because when most of us hear the word rest, we think about vacations or burnout recovery, self-care, or taking a break after exhaustion. But rest actually shows up at the very beginning of Scripture in Genesis 2. Let's read it together in Genesis 2, 1-3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So I remember sitting with that passage and realizing something I had never really slowed down enough to notice before. God rested before sin entered the world, which means rest was never created because humanity became exhausted. Rest was part of God's design from the very beginning. That completely confronted the way survival mode had discipled me, because survival mode teaches you rest comes later, after everything is handled and after the inbox is clear after the house is clean, after everyone else is okay, and after the work is done. But come on, that moment never actually comes. There's there was always more work to be done, more pressure, more responsibility, more needs, more people depending on you. And yet, God Himself established a rhythm at the very beginning of creation. Now, obviously, God wasn't tired. God doesn't get depleted. So why did He rest? It's because He was modeling something for us. He was modeling a rhythm, a margin, completion, and delight. I think survival mode strips all of those things out of our lives. How deeply are we connected to productivity? If you sit down to rest, do you feel peace or does guilt show up? Your mind starts racing. You start thinking about what still needs to get done. You feel behind before you even stop moving. And then God brought me to Exodus 20, and I realized that Sabbath was never about legalism. It was about trust. So let's read Exodus 20. Exodus 20, 8 through 10. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. So notice something here. God fully expected work. It says 6 days you shall labor. Work is not bad. Responsibility is not bad. Building something meaningful is not bad. But neither is work supposed to consume your entire identity. Though I think survival mode slowly turns productivity into identity. So when you stop producing, you suddenly feel exposed, like your value disappeared with your output. But Sabbath interrupts that. Sabbath forces you to confront this question. Can I stop working and still believe God is in control? It also confronts the fact that you have limits. You are human. You are not God. The world continues without your control. That is both humbling and freeing. Then later, Jesus in Mark 2 says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That's Mark 2:27. And I love that Jesus is reminding us that Sabbath was not created to burden humanity. It was created because God understood humanity. He understood our limits and our tendencies towards striving. He knew that we would have an obsession with productivity, our temptation to build our identity around usefulness. I think survival mode makes people live like machines instead of humans. But even Jesus rested. Jesus withdrew from crowds. Jesus stepped away. Jesus created margin. And Jesus slowed down enough to actually be present with people. And if Jesus himself did not live at a frantic pace, why do we assume faithfulness requires one? After I started to understand these passages, rest stopped feeling lazy. It started feeling obedient, and it started feeling responsible. It started feeling healthy. And honestly, it started feeling like the key to my productivity. Rest is part of God's design. And if that's how God designed it, it would be unwise to step out of alignment with that. And I think God proved what could happen when I'm actually in alignment with His design. And Sabbath became a priority in my life, sometimes not even on a Sunday. But I made sure one day a week was going to be dedicated to rest. And rest looks different for everyone. Rest can look like spending time with family. Rest can look like a day of physical fitness. Everyone gets recharged differently. It just 100% can't look like survival mode. Women, we need permission to stop glorifying exhaustion and admit we're tired and not okay. Because culture celebrates over functioning. The woman who never stops, the woman who says yes to everything, the woman who carries everyone, the woman who burns herself out proving she can handle it all. But eventually that lifestyle steals your presence. It makes you reactive instead of intentional. And one of the biggest things God taught me during this season was rest must become intentional, because survival mode will consume every unprotected space in your life. That's why I started scheduling rest first, not after everything else, before it. Margin went on the calendar. Time with God went on the calendar. Movement went on the calendar. Time with my kids, date nights with my husband. At first, it felt really uncomfortable and really irresponsible until I realized I was finally becoming more present, more grounded, more focused, more emotionally healthy, more spiritually healthy, and more effective and productive. Not because I was doing more, but because I stopped building from internal panic. I think some women listening need to hear this. You are allowed to create rhythm that supports your actual life. You are allowed to work less and still honor your calling. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to create boundaries, and you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop proving your worth through exhaustion, because God never asked you to destroy yourself to build something meaningful. Here's the hard truth. Your inability to rest is revealing something. And honestly, for many high-capacity women, it's revealing fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of disappointing people, fear of losing control, fear of not being enough without productivity attached to your identity. One of the hardest things I had to admit was that I didn't just fear failure. I feared limits, because limits forced me to confront the reality that I'm human. I cannot do everything or carry everything, control everything, or prevent every hard thing. And it's incredibly freeing, because the world keeps spinning without my control. And that's actually good news. I want you to sit with these questions honestly this week. Why does rest make you so uncomfortable? What emotions show up when you slow down? Do you secretly associate productivity with worth? What would happen if you started creating intentional rhythm instead of reacting constantly? And where has survival mode convinced you that exhaustion equals faithfulness? What would it look like to build your life from peace instead of panic? So this week, I want you to intentionally create one rhythm of rest, not accidentally and not if there's time, intentionally. Protect one block of margin before your schedule fills itself, and spend time with God without multitasking. Go outside, turn off your phone, move your body, read something life-giving, and be fully present with your kids or with your family. Let yourself breathe. And when guilt shows up, pay attention to it, because guilt around rest usually reveals where fear has been discipling you. And ask God honestly, what do I believe would happen if I stopped carrying everything? And then ask Him, Lord, what would it look like to trust you here? Because survival mode taught you how to survive, but God is teaching you how to live. If something from today's episode resonated with you, you have a story you would like to share or questions, I genuinely would love to hear from you. You can email me at karenwithani.pod@gmail.com, or if you want to stay connected outside of the podcast, you can find me over on Instagram. I share more behind the scenes, conversations, and updates there. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, or for the full experience, you can watch every episode on Spotify and YouTube. It would mean so much to us if you would like, follow, subscribe, and share. You can leave a comment and give us a review. Interact with the show wherever you can. Honestly, it's the best way you can support the show and help the message reach other listeners like you. Until next week, go build bold.